The great hall was huge. It stretched out like a football field, with walls that curved up to a ceiling so high you could barely see it. Strange lights floated in the air, casting weird shadows on the floor. This was the Galactic Council chamber, on Nexus Prime, and today it was packed with aliens from 47 different worlds. Claire Mitchell sat at the human table. Her back was straight, her hands folded in front of her. She was tired. At 62, she had spent most of her life trying to make peace between humans and aliens. Her gray hair was pulled back tight, and her blue eyes were sharp as she watched the proceedings. The Zephyrian High Counselor stood at the center of the chamber. It looked like a tall, thin ghost made of silver mist. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once, translated into human words by the machines around the room. "The human species is too dangerous," the counselor said. Its voice was cold and final. "They fight too much. They explore too far. They ask too many questions. This cannot continue." Jake Harrison sat next to Claire. He was a big man with gray hair and scars on his hands from old battles. He had been fighting aliens for 30 years, protecting human colonies from raiders and invaders. Now he wore his blue admiral uniform, but his face was red with anger. "We have made our decision," the counselor continued. "Humans will change. Their bodies to be less violent. They will give up their warships. They will accept watchers in their home system. And they will never leave the small part of space we give them." Lisa Rodriguez sat on Claire's other side. She was younger, maybe 40, with dark hair and quick brown eyes. She commanded the Colonial Defense Force, the soldiers who protected human settlers on distant worlds. She had seen what happened when humans tried to be peaceful with aliens who only wanted to hurt them. Behind them sat Nathan Brooks. He was a scientist who studied alien minds and cultures. He had spent 20 years living with different alien species, learning their languages, understanding their ways of thinking. He knew more about aliens than almost any other human. And he knew something was very wrong about this meeting around the chamber. Aliens from dozens of worlds nodded their agreement. The Christarch Collective looked like walking diamonds, their faces hard and sharp. They had never liked humans because humans were too soft and warm and messy. The hegemony of 12 were tall and thin with too many arms. They thought humans were stupid because they didn't live as long as other species. Even the Vorthan Federation, who usually stayed neutral, had decided that humans were too much trouble. "You see?" the counselor said, sweeping one misty arm toward the other aliens. "All civilized species agree. Humans must be controlled." Claire had heard enough. She stood up slowly. The chamber grew quiet as hundreds of alien eyes turned to look at her. She was just one small human woman in a room full of powerful beings, but something in her manner made them all listen. "We came here in good faith," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the huge room. "We wanted to work together. We wanted to be partners. We wanted to share the galaxy with you as equals." The counselor's misty form flickered with what might have been amusement. "Equals? You are a young species. You have been in space for only a few hundred years. We have been traveling the stars for thousands of years. You are children playing with dangerous toys. Maybe we are young," Claire said, "but we are not children, and we are not toys for you to play with." She began gathering her papers from the table. Each movement was slow and deliberate. Jake Harrison stood up next to her, his big frame casting a shadow across the table. Lisa Rodriguez followed, her hand resting on her weapon out of habit. "Nathan." Brooks closed his computer and stood as well. "What are you doing?" the counselor demanded. "We are leaving," Claire said simply. "The human delegation withdraws from these talks. We will not return." The chamber erupted in chaos. Aliens chittered and whistled and made sounds that had no human words. The Christarch Collective's diamond faces flashed with bright light. The hegemony's many arms waved in agitation. Even the usually calm Vorthan Federation began speaking rapidly in their musical language. "You cannot simply leave." The counselor shouted, its misty form growing larger and more solid. "There will be consequences. The galaxy will not tolerate a rogue species. Claire stopped at the chamber's massive doors. They were made of some kind of metal that seemed to shift and change colors as you looked at it. She turned back to face the hundreds of aliens who were now on their feet, shouting and gesturing wildly. "We know there will be consequences," she said. "There always are. But we will face them as free beings, not as your slaves." Jake Harrison stepped forward. His voice was deep and rough from years of shouting orders in battle. "You want to know what makes humans different from all of you?" He called out to the crowd. "We would rather face the unknown alone than live on our knees. This is madness." The counselor cried, "You do not understand the dangers. There are things in the dark between stars that you cannot imagine. Things that have been sleeping for millions of years. The old agreements, the old protections, are your problem now," Claire finished. "As they have always been ours." The four humans walked through the doors together. Behind them, the chamber continued to erupt in panic and confusion. As the doors began to close, Jake Harrison looked back one last time at the aliens who had demanded humanity's surrender. "You wanted us to be peaceful," he said. "You wanted us to be safe. But you never asked us what we wanted, and what we want is to be free." The doors sealed shut with a deep, final sound that seemed to echo through the entire station. The four humans walked down the long corridor toward their ship, their footsteps the only sound in the sudden silence. Claire felt tired but also relieved. They had tried to make peace the alien way. They had offered compromise after compromise. They had bent over backward to prove they were not the violent monsters the aliens claimed they were. But in the end, peace on someone else's terms was not peace at all. So what now? Lisa asked as they reached their ship. Claire looked out through the viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth and all the human colonies and all the people who were counting on them to find a way forward. "Now we go home," she said, "and we prepare for whatever comes next." As their ship pulled away from Nexus Prime, none of them knew that they had just made the most important decision in the history of the galaxy. They had chosen freedom over safety, uncertainty over submission. And in making that choice, they had started a chain of events that would change everything. The stars looked the same as they always had. But something had changed. Something important. And across the galaxy, in the deep dark places between worlds, ancient things that had been sleeping for millions of years began to stir. 6 months had passed since the humans walked out of the peace talks. Earth felt different now. The sky looked the same, but everyone knew that beyond the atmosphere, things were changing. Elena Martinez sat in her chair at the Lunar Observatory, watching the screens that showed radio signals from across the galaxy. She had been doing this job for 15 years, listening to the constant chatter of alien ships trading goods, sharing news, and sending messages between worlds. But today, something was wrong. "The signals are getting weaker," she said to her assistant, a young man named Paul. "Look at this." She pointed to a graph on her screen. 3 months ago, we were picking up thousands of transmissions every day. Now it's down to hundreds. Paul looked at the numbers and frowned. Maybe they're just using different frequencies? Elena shook her head. "I've checked everything. The aliens are talking less, much less. And some of the big trading routes have gone completely quiet. On Earth, President John Carter was having his own problems. He sat in the war room deep under the White House, surrounded by his top advisors. The room was filled with holographic displays showing Earth's defenses and the positions of alien ships. General Patricia Adams stood at the main display. She was a tough woman who had worked her way up through the military ranks. Her short gray hair was always perfectly neat, and she never smiled unless she meant it. "The blockade is working perfectly," she reported. "No alien ships have tried to cross into our solar system. The defense grid is active and ready." The defense grid was humanity's biggest secret. For 200 years, while human diplomats were meeting with aliens and making trade deals, human engineers have been quietly building something else. They had put special devices at the edge of the solar system, hidden among what looked like ordinary mining stations. These devices created an invisible wall that alien ships could not cross. How long can we keep this up? The president asked. As long as we need to, General Adams replied. The aliens think we're trapped in here. They don't know that we're the ones keeping them out. Marcus Thompson, the chief engineer who had helped build the defense grid, stood up from his chair. He was a big man with calloused hands and oil stains on his shirt. He had spent most of his life working on machines that other people didn't understand. There's something else, he said quietly. Something we didn't expect when we built the grid. It's not just keeping the aliens out, it's keeping something else in. The president looked at him sharply. What do you mean? Marcus pulled up a new display. It showed energy readings from all around Earth's solar system. These readings started showing up right after we activated the grid. There's something here with us. Something that's been here all along, but we never noticed it before. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the silence was spreading. The Andorian trade routes, which had been busy with merchant ships for thousands of years, were now empty. The Hegemony's fast courier ships, which used to carry messages between worlds in just days, had stopped flying. Even the Christarch Collective, who prided themselves on always being connected to each other, were having trouble with their communications. Rachel Stone was the commander of Watchtower, a human space station that had been built far from Earth to monitor alien activity. She was a careful woman who paid attention to details that other people might miss. She had been watching the alien communications networks for months, and she had noticed something disturbing. Lieutenant Walsh, she called to her second-in-command. Tony Walsh was a young officer who was good with computers and communication systems. Yes, Commander. Look at this pattern, Rachel said, pointing to a map of the galaxy on her screen. The silence isn't random, it's starting from specific points and spreading outward. Tony studied the map carefully. You're right. It looks like it's coming from ... Oh, his face went pale. What is it? Commander, all of these points have something in common. They're all places where humans used to live. Old colonies, research stations, trading posts. Places we abandoned when we pulled back to Earth. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. Show me all the human settlements that were abandoned in the last 10 years. Tony's fingers flew over his keyboard. A new map appeared, showing dozens of worlds where humans had once lived but had left behind. Every single one of them was at the center of a growing circle of silence. My God, Rachel whispered. What were we doing out there? The answer came from Dr. Samuel Hayes, an archaeologist who had been studying ancient ruins on a planet called Kepler 442b. He had been cut off from Earth when the defense grid went up, but he had kept working. His small team had been digging through the remains of a civilization that had died out millions of years ago. Earth Base, this is Dr. Hayes. His voice crackled through the long-range communicator. I'm sending you something important. The ruins. Here, they're not just old buildings, they're warnings. The images that came through the communication link were fuzzy but clear enough to understand. They showed walls covered with symbols and pictures. The pictures told a story of a great civilization that had once ruled the galaxy, but something had destroyed them. Something that came from the dark spaces between stars. The inscriptions are clear, Dr. Hayes continued. They call them the Devourers. They're not alive like we understand life. They're something else, something that feeds on thoughts and dreams and memories. Every advanced species that ever lived in this galaxy had to face them. On Earth, the government's best scientists gathered. To study the images, Dr. Rebecca Foster, who specialized in alien biology, was the first to understand the implications. These aren't just historical records, she said to the assembled team. They're instructions. The civilization that built these ruins, they found a way to fight the Devourers, but it required a special kind of species. A species that could think and dream in ways that the Devourers couldn't digest. What kind of species? Asked Dr. Brooks, who had returned from the peace talks with new questions about alien behavior. Dr. Foster pulled up a genetic analysis of human DNA, the kind that has certain unusual markers in their genetic code, markers that we've never been able to explain. Markers that make human consciousness different from every other species we've encountered. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humans weren't just another species that had evolved on Earth. They were something else. Something that had been placed there for a specific purpose. We weren't just exploring the galaxy, Dr. Foster continued. We were guarding it. Every human colony, every research station, every place where humans lived and worked was actually a watch post. We were keeping something locked away and we didn't even know it. Admiral Harrison, who had been listening to the reports from his ship in orbit, understood first. And now we've abandoned those posts. We've come home and sealed ourselves in, which means whatever we were guarding against is now free to wake up. As if in response to his words, the monitoring stations around Earth began picking up new signals. They weren't from the alien species they knew. They were from something older, something that had been waiting in the dark for a very long time. The silence that had been spreading across the galaxy wasn't the absence of sound. It was the sound of something ancient and hungry beginning to stir. And humanity, in their desire to be free, had accidentally broken the locks that had kept it sleeping. The stars were still there, but they were no longer safe. And somewhere, in the darkness between worlds, things that should have stayed buried were opening their eyes for the first time in millions of years. The truth came from the dead world of Kepler 442b. Dr. Samuel Hayes had been digging there for 3 years, studying the ruins of an ancient civilization. He was a thin man with dirty clothes and tired eyes, but his mind was sharp and curious. When the aliens cut off all contact with Earth, he and his small team were trapped on the planet with no way home, but Samuel kept working. He had found something in the deepest part of the ruins, something that made his hands shake when he touched it. The walls were covered with symbols that told a story older than any human civilization, and the story was about Earth. The beings that built this place called themselves the Architects, Samuel said into his radio, hoping someone on Earth could hear him. They were the last great civilization before everything went dark, and they knew what was coming. He sent pictures through the communication link. The images showed vast cities that stretched across entire continents, ships that could travel between galaxies, and beings of incredible power and wisdom. But the last pictures were different. They showed the cities empty, the ships abandoned, and the architects themselves fleeing into the void. They weren't running from war, Samuel continued. They were running from something that couldn't be fought with weapons or shields. Something that ate thoughts and dreams and left nothing behind. The Devourers. That's what the Architects called them. They weren't alive in any way that living beings could understand. They were hunger itself, darkness that consumed light, emptiness that swallowed everything it touched. They had destroyed every advanced civilization in the galaxy, one by one, until only the Architects remained. But the Architects were clever, Samuel said. They found a way to fight back, not with weapons but with life itself. They created a species that could think and dream in ways that the Devourers couldn't digest. A species that could stand guard while the Devourers slept. On Earth, Dr. Rebecca Foster listened to Samuel's transmissions with growing horror. She was the government's top expert on genetics, and she had been studying human DNA for 20 years. There were things about human genetic code that had never made sense. Sequences that seemed to serve no purpose, markers that appeared in no other Earth species. The genetic evidence is undeniable, she told the emergency council meeting. Humans didn't evolve on Earth, we were placed there. The Architects designed us specifically to be guardians against the Devourers. President Carter looked at the genetic charts on his screen. You're saying we're not really human at all? We're human, Dr. Foster replied, but we're also something else. Something that was made to stand between the galaxy and the things that live in the dark. The revelation explains so many things. Why humans were different from every other species they had met. Why human consciousness worked in ways that confused alien scientists. Why humans could survive in places that drove other species insane. They had been designed for a purpose that they had forgotten. Admiral Harrison received the news. While commanding the hastily assembled Terra Defense Fleet, His ships were spread out across the solar system, watching for any sign of alien attack. But now he realized they were watching for the wrong thing. "Sir," Communications Officer Steve Phillips called from his station, "we're getting reports from all the abandoned human colonies. The old installations are powering up." Harrison felt his blood turn cold. What installations? "The ones we thought were mining equipment and research stations. They're all activating at once." "And sir, they're not mining installations, they're prisons." The truth was worse than anyone had imagined. Every human colony, every research station, every place where humans had lived and worked was built on top of a devourer prison. The architects had scattered these prisons across the galaxy, each one containing a piece of the ancient enemy. And they had put humans on top of them to stand guard, but now the humans were gone. They had withdrawn to Earth, leaving the prisons unguarded, and the devourers were waking up. Captain Lisa Rodriguez was leading a reconnaissance mission to the abandoned mining world of Tartarus. She had been there 5 years ago when it was a bustling human colony with thousands of workers. Now it was supposed to be empty. "Captain," her pilot said nervously, "something's wrong with the planet." Lisa looked out the viewport and gasped. The planet's surface was split by massive cracks that glowed with a dark, pulsing light. The cracks were spreading, and from within them came something that hurt to look at directly. "It's not light," her science officer said, his voice shaking. "It's the opposite of light. It's eating the starlight around it." As they watched, the darkness began to spread beyond the planet's surface. It reached out like fingers, touching the nearby asteroids and space stations. Everything it touched simply vanished, not destroyed, but consumed, as if it had never existed at all. "Command," Lisa said into her radio, trying to keep her voice steady. "We need to get back to Earth. Now, the devourers aren't just waking up. They're already free." Across the galaxy, the same scene was playing out on dozens of worlds. Ancient prisons were breaking open, releasing fragments of the devourers that had been locked away for millions of years. Without human guardians to keep them contained, the dark entities were free to begin their feast. The Zephyrian homeworld was the first to fall. The Silver Mist beings had been proud of their advanced technology and ancient wisdom. But when the darkness came, their technology failed and their wisdom meant nothing. In the space of a single day, a civilization that had lasted for 10,000 years simply ceased to exist. The Crystarch Collective tried to fight back with their diamond-hard bodies and crystalline minds. But the devourers didn't attack the body. They attacked the mind, the soul, the very essence of what made a being alive. The Crystarch worlds went dark one by one, their inhabitants vanishing without a trace. The hegemony of 12 sent their fastest ships to evacuate their core worlds. But the devourers moved faster than lights, spreading through space like a plague of nothingness. By the time the evacuation ships arrived, there was nothing left to evacuate. Dr. Nathan Brooks, who had studied alien psychology for decades, watched the reports with growing understanding. "They're not just consuming the aliens," he told the Emergency Council. "They're learning from them. Each mind they devour makes them smarter, more adaptable." The implications were terrifying. The devourers weren't just mindless hunger. They were intelligence that fed on intelligence, growing stronger with every civilization they consumed. And they were heading toward the core worlds of the galaxy, where billions of beings lived in densely packed systems. "If they reach the galactic center," Dr. Brooks continued, "they'll have enough minds to break free of this galaxy entirely. They'll spread to other galaxies, other universes. Nothing will be able to stop them. On Earth, the defense grid held firm, but it wasn't meant to keep the devourers out. It was meant to keep humans in, to protect them from the chaos that was consuming the galaxy. The same isolation that had seemed like a prison was now humanity's only hope for survival. President Carter made the hardest decision of his life. "We're going to send a message to the surviving alien fleets. Any ships that can make it to the edge of our solar system will be allowed inside the defense grid. But they have to understand the rules. Earth is in charge now." The message went out on all frequencies in all languages. Within hours, the first alien ships appeared at the edge of the solar system. They were refugees from worlds that no longer existed, survivors of civilizations that had been consumed by the darkness. The Galactic Council, which had once demanded humanity's submission, now begged for human protection. The species that had called humans too violent and dangerous now looked to them as their only hope for survival. Claire Mitchell, the ambassador who had walked out of the peace talks, sat in her office and watched the alien ships requesting asylum. She felt no satisfaction in being proved right. The cost of that proof was too high. What do we do now? Her assistant asked. Claire looked out at the stars, which seemed dimmer than they had before. Now we remember what we were made for. We were guardians once. It's time to guard again. But even as she spoke, she knew the truth. The Devourers were free, and they were stronger than ever. The galaxy was dying, and humanity might be the only thing standing between existence and the hungry darkness that wanted to devour everything. The galaxy was dying. Every day brought news of another world going dark, another civilization vanishing into the hungry darkness. President Carter sat in his command bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, watching the holographic displays that showed the spread of destruction across known space. Each point of light on the map represented a star system. As he watched, another light flickered and went out. That was the Vorthan Federation's capital world, home to 3 billion beings. Now it was nothing but empty space and silence. 12 core worlds lost in the past week, reported intelligence. Director Kevin Rogers. He was a quiet man who had spent his career analyzing alien communications. Now there were fewer and fewer communications to analyze. The hegemony is down to their last 3 colonies. The Christarch Collective has completely fallen silent. Outside the bunker, Earth's skies were filled with alien refugee ships. They came in all shapes and sizes, carrying the last survivors of civilizations that had existed for thousands of years. The proud beings who had once demanded that humans submit to their authority now begged for protection behind Earth's defense grid. The emergency session of what remained of the Galactic Council was being held in orbit around Earth. The Great Chamber had been replaced by a small meeting room on a human space station. Only a few dozen representatives remained from the hundreds who had once gathered to judge humanity. Ambassador Claire Mitchell stood before the assembled survivors. She looked older than her years, worn down by the weight of responsibility and the horror of what was happening. But her voice was still strong when she spoke. "You called us violent," she said to the small group of alien representatives. "You said we were too dangerous to exist freely among civilized species. You demanded that we change our very nature to fit your idea of peace." The Christarch representative, one of the few diamond beings still alive, flickered with dim light. Its usually perfect crystal face was cracked and clouded. Through the translator, its voice was barely a whisper. "We did not know. The ancient records were lost to us. We thought the old warnings were myths and legends." "They weren't myths," Admiral Harrison said from his flagship, the Earth Defense Ship Defiance. His image appeared on the main screen, showing a man who had aged years in the past few months. They were job descriptions. The Devourers weren't just some ancient enemy. They were prisoners, and we were their guards. The truth was becoming clear to everyone now. The peace that the galaxy had enjoyed for millennia hadn't been natural. It had been bought with constant vigilance, with humans standing watch over ancient prisons scattered across thousands of worlds. Every human settlement had been a guardhouse. Every human family had been part of an enormous security force that they didn't even know existed. Dr. Nathan Brooks appeared on another screen from his laboratory on Earth. He had been working day and night to understand the enemy they faced. His usually neat appearance was rumpled, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "The Devourers aren't just consuming consciousness," he reported. "They're studying it. Each mind they devour teaches them something new. They're learning how we think, how we feel, how we organize ourselves. They're becoming smarter with every world they destroy." The implications were terrifying. The Devourers had started as mindless hunger, but now they were developing intelligence. They were beginning to plan, to strategize, to anticipate human responses, and they were moving steadily toward the core worlds of the galaxy where the largest populations lived. How long before they reached the galactic center? President Carter asked. At their current rate of expansion, maybe 6 months, Dr. Brooks replied. And if they consume the core worlds, they'll have enough mental energy to break free of this galaxy entirely. The room fell silent as everyone understood what that meant. The Devourers would spread to other galaxies, consuming everything in their path. The universe itself would become an empty, lifeless void. Captain Lisa Rodriguez had been preparing for a desperate mission. She stood in the briefing room of her ship, the Redemption, addressing a mixed crew of humans and aliens. It was the first time in galactic history that different species had worked together as equals. "We're going back to Kepler 442b, she announced. Dr. Hayes found something in the architect ruins before he died, a weapon. Something that might be able to stop the Devourers permanently. Her crew listened intently. They were volunteers, all of them. Humans who had lost friends and family to the alien wars, aliens who had lost their entire worlds to the Devourers. They had nothing left to lose except the hope that their sacrifice might save what remained of galactic civilization. The weapon is called a consciousness bomb, Lisa continued. It creates a psychic barrier so powerful that it can seal the Devourers away forever, but it requires a living mind to guide it, and that mind will be consumed in the process. The silence in the room was complete. Everyone understood what she was saying. This was a suicide mission. Someone would have to stay behind and die to activate the weapon. The worst part, Lisa said quietly, is that it's not just one mind. According to the architect records, the weapon needs the consciousness of an entire species. A species that was designed specifically to fight the Devourers. A human species. The revelation hit the crew like a physical blow. To save the galaxy, all of humanity would have to sacrifice itself. They would have to give up their physical existence, becoming pure consciousness that would serve as an eternal barrier against the darkness. Back on Earth, the leadership struggled with the impossible choice. President Carter sat in his office, with his closest advisors staring at the reports from Dr. Hayes's final transmission. "We can activate the weapon," General Adams said, "but it means the end of humanity as we know it. We would become something else. Something that exists between dimensions, standing guard for eternity. And if we don't?" the President asked. "The Devourers consume everything. Every world, every species, every living thing in the universe eventually falls to them." Ambassador Mitchell, who had started this crisis by walking out of the peace talks, felt the weight of history on her shoulders. The aliens demanded that we change our nature to fit their idea of peace. Now we're being asked to change our nature to save existence itself. The choice was put to a vote. Not just to the government, but to every human on Earth and in the colonies. Everyone would have to agree. Everyone would have to choose to give up their human form to become eternal guardians. The voting took 3 days. When it was finished, the result was overwhelming. 97% of humanity had voted yes. They would sacrifice themselves to save the galaxy. Lisa Rodriguez received the news as her ship approached. Kepler 442b, the planet looked different now. The ancient ruins were glowing with energy, and the weapon that Dr. Hayes had discovered was powering up for the first time in millions of years. "Captain," her science officer reported, "we're detecting massive energy buildups all across human space. It looks like every human is beginning to feel the pull of the weapon." Lisa could feel it too. Something deep in her mind was calling to her, telling her that the time had come to fulfill humanity's true purpose. All across Earth and the colonies on the refugee ships, humans were feeling the same call. "Tell them," Lisa said into her communicator, speaking to Admiral Harrison and President Carter and Ambassador Mitchell and all the humans who were about to make the ultimate sacrifice. "Tell them that we didn't leave the peace talks because we were violent. We left because we remembered what peace really costs." She placed her hand on the weapon's activation control. Around the galaxy, every other human did the same. They were ready to pay the price for peace, the real price. The price that the architects had paid millions of years ago, and that humans had been created to pay when the time came. The weapon began to charge, and Lisa Rodriguez prepared to lead her species into something greater and more terrible than anyone had ever imagined. The ancient weapon hummed with power that had been sleeping for millions of years. Captain Lisa Rodriguez stood before the crystal structure deep inside the architect, ruins on Kepler 442b. The weapon was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Glowing with a light that seemed to come from another dimension. Around her, the mixed crew of humans and aliens worked frantically to hold off the devourers that were already breaking through the cracks in reality. The darkness was pouring through the planet's surface like black blood, reaching out with hungry tendrils toward anything that lived and thought and dreamed. "Captain," her communications officer called out, his voice tight with fear. "The devourers are everywhere. They're coming through the walls, through the floor, through the air itself." Lisa kept her hand hovering over the activation control. The weapon was ready. All across the galaxy, she could feel other humans preparing to make the same choice. President Carter in his bunker on Earth, Admiral Harrison on his ship, Ambassador Mitchell in her office. Millions of ordinary people in homes and offices and schools. "Admiral Harrison to all units," came the voice through her communicator. "The fleet is in position." "Whatever you're going to do, Captain, do it now. We can't hold them much longer." The devourers were no longer hiding in the dark spaces between stars. They had grown bold and strong, fed by the minds of entire civilizations. They moved through space like a living shadow, consuming everything in their path. Whole star systems simply vanished as they passed, leaving nothing but empty void where life had once flourished. Lisa looked at the alien members of her crew. They were brave beings who had volunteered for this mission knowing they might not survive. But they didn't understand what was really about to happen. Only the humans knew. The full cost of activating the weapon. "Tell them," she said into her communicator, speaking to every human who could hear her voice. "Tell the galaxy that humans didn't leave the peace talks because we were violent or stubborn or proud. We left because we remembered something that everyone else had forgotten." She thought about her daughter back on Earth, a little girl who would never grow up to be human in the way that humans had always been human. She thought about her parents, her friends, everyone she had ever loved. In a few moments, they would all be transformed into something else entirely. We remembered that peace isn't something you negotiate for. Peace isn't something you get by. Making everyone the same, real peace has to be earned. And sometimes the price is everything you have. Lisa pressed her hand down on the activation control. Across the galaxy, every human felt the pull at the same moment. It started as a tingling in their minds, then grew stronger and stronger until it felt like their very souls were being lifted out of their bodies. On Earth, President Carter felt his consciousness expanding beyond the walls of his bunker. In space, Admiral Harrison felt his mind touching the stars themselves. The transformation was beautiful and terrible. Human bodies remained behind, but human consciousness became something greater. They became living energy, pure thought that could exist in the spaces between atoms in the fabric of space itself. They became the guardians they had always been meant to be. The devourers sensed the change immediately. The hungry darkness that had been spreading across the galaxy suddenly found itself surrounded by an enemy it remembered from ancient nightmares. The architects had created humanity specifically to fight this battle, and now humanity was fulfilling its purpose. The battle was not fought with weapons or ships. It was fought with will and consciousness and the fundamental power of life itself. The transformed humans wrapped themselves around the devourers like a net made of living thought, holding them, containing them, slowly forcing them back into the prisons where they belonged. The devourers fought back with all their strength. They had consumed the minds of billions of beings and had become incredibly powerful. But they had never faced anything like humanity. Human consciousness was chaotic and unpredictable, full of contradictions and impossible dreams. The devourers could not digest it, could not understand it, could not overcome it. Slowly, steadily, the humans began to win. The darkness that had been spreading across the galaxy was pushed back, compressed, forced into smaller and smaller spaces. The Devourers screamed with voices that could shatter planets, but the humans held firm. One by one, the ancient prisons were sealed again. The cracks in reality closed. The hungry darkness was locked away in the spaces between dimensions, guarded by human souls that would never rest, never sleep, never stop watching. The battle lasted only minutes in real time, but it felt like centuries to those who fought it. When it was over, the galaxy fell silent. Not the silence of death, but the silence of peace. Real peace, earned through sacrifice. The surviving aliens looked up at stars that seemed brighter than before. They could no longer see humans with their eyes, but they could feel them everywhere. In the solar wind, in the space between planets, in the quantum foam that filled the vacuum. Humanity had become part of the universe itself. Ambassador Claire Mitchell's final message was transmitted as her consciousness joined the Eternal Guard. Her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, speaking in every language that had ever existed. "We told you there would be consequences for our choice," she said. "We told you we would face them as free beings. The consequences were greater than any of us imagined. But we faced them together, as we always have." The message reached every corner of the galaxy, carried by the transformed humans who now existed in the fabric of space itself. The peace talks ended because we could not accept your terms. We could not become less than what we were. But now we have become more than what we ever dreamed. We are the guardians in the dark, the watchers between stars. We are the price that peace demands. On the worlds that remained, alien civilizations began to rebuild. They built monuments to humanity, not just to remember their sacrifice, but to remember the lesson they had taught. Peace was not something that could be imposed from above. It had to be chosen, protected, and sometimes paid for with everything. The new galactic government was different from the old council. It was smaller, humbler, more aware of the cost of the peace they enjoyed. They made new laws based on freedom rather than control, on cooperation rather than submission. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. New species emerged and joined the galactic community. The memory of the Devourers faded into legend. But the memory of humanity remained strong. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between heartbeats, travelers in space would hear whispers in the void. The voices of humans, still keeping watch, still standing guard against the darkness that waited beyond. The edges of reality, children of all species learned the story in school. How the humans had walked away from the peace talks because they refused to be controlled. How their choice had unleashed an ancient evil that nearly destroyed everything. And how, in the end, they had saved the galaxy by becoming something greater than any single species could be. The peace they had refused to accept on others' terms, they had created on their own. And in that creation, they had become eternal. The stars remembered their sacrifice, and across the galaxy and the spaces between worlds, humanity continued its endless vigil. The peace talks had ended, but the peace itself would last forever.